Hello, my name is Nikki Edmondson. I chose the article for this particular assignment to be Seeking the Best Leadership Lessons from the Military. This article is written by Catherine Lawlin and Kara A. Arnold. This article relates to my research paper that I'm going to be doing for the class because I am focusing on the film G.I. Jane, and I'm going to try to show that the film G.I. Jane serves as equipment for living because it shows that women can match men in strength and endurance. So I thought this film would be good because it is showing how the economy can learn on how the military acts, and it goes into aspects of how women, how people feel about women in military, specifically being in a leadership role. The thesis of this article that I found was, in this article we consider some parallels between the modern military and civilian management with respect to women's advancement into positions of leadership. The layout of this article was interesting in that it didn't necessarily have subheadings, so I kind of had to conclude on my own where I felt things were laid out. Obviously, the thesis was at the very beginning of the article, along with the introduction, which just kind of stated a few facts about women in the military, but I believe that's on my next slide. So in the introduction, this article brings attention to the following items: lessons learned about moving women into positions of leadership, as well as the masculine nature of the military, how the military exposes many barriers facing women elsewhere. The article goes into 4 different aspects, and I'll explain to you how those are in the article in a moment, but they include the need for a new kind of leader, the consequences for organizations ignoring external realities. Thirdly, the articles discuss innovative research for demonstrating that genuine change must go beyond legislation. And finally, the military illustrates some challenges in identifying the best candidates for leadership positions. Moving on to the methods and research section of the article. The article uses several different methods in how they come up with their content. And it was interesting, as I mentioned earlier, the way the article conveys their information is they have it sort of listed out in bullet points as Lesson 1, Lesson 2, Lesson 3, and Lesson 4, which those lessons hit the 4 bullet points I just mentioned in my previous slide. But they also have interview comments which came from other articles, such as, which I will explain, or I'll go into further detail in another slide. But there's interview comments from cadets at the Royal Military College where they interview them. Also, there are insights from recent Canadian reports, which, by the way, I should have mentioned. This is based on Canadian military, but it also goes into aspects of our American military because we do closely work with each other. But regardless, the article is prominent in my research paper that I will be doing for the class. They also held their own interviews on Canadian women in the combat, and of course the format, as I already mentioned, is broken up into lessons, and you will also see how it's sort of a question and answer type of deal. Yeah, we'll go into that in a minute. As for the analysis of the paper, as I've just mentioned, it's almost like the military versus the corporate business world, and it shows us how it will explain the military aspects and how the corporate business world can learn from how the military responds. And it goes into other scholarly articles. One specific quote that I found, which I thought was very well related to mine, is recent research suggests that women's physical abilities are often underestimated, which goes into the whole G.I. Jane aspect, because the whole reason in women not being in the military is because they're not physically as fit as men. But now that we are getting into the present day, we get into the aspect of gender equality. Also, as I mentioned, their own interviews. So recent interviews with students at the Royal Military College of Canada confirm that this type of thinking persists with the next generation of male soldiers. Negative comments about women in the forces also dispel thoughts that younger generations will be more willing to accommodate diversity if left to their own accord. There were also comments about women in the forces, comments such as, the standards have been lowered so much for all of these people that we are no longer a fighting force, and comments such as, I just don't believe a woman could carry me out if I was wounded in battle. And one of my favorite quotes that I read in the article was, the Israelis tried having women in their combat units and it didn't work. Now it's our turn to be ridiculed by other countries. Now, of course, being a woman, I'm going to get a little bit caught up because I believe that, gender equality should happen, but I'm not going to get into my own comments. You can read those in my paper. Going back to the second bullet on this slide, I forgot to mention, there were a few statistics in the article, and one of them I wanted to mention. It was almost 24% over previous records in marathon running compared to men's improvements of 3% since the law was passed. So that's just a fun fact, basically stating, that women can obviously run as fast as men. So, anyway, I just thought that was related to the article about women's physical abilities being underestimated. As for the discussion part of this article, it basically went into determining the how and the why of why women should be promoted in the military as well as in the business world. And as I mentioned earlier, it's kind of a question and answer type of article where they would state a lesson learned as for what we can learn from the military. And then the second part, as you see from my picture here, it states the implications for business, how the business can learn in this article. And this quote that I have here, I felt that it was prominent in the paper. I'll just read it here. Although one obvious concern is that women who enact dominance as an influence strategy will be subject to more negative reactions than men. What we do not know is the extent to which differences exist between felt attitudes and displayed behavior by women in this regard. To the extent that a discrepancy exists between possessing and displaying these personality characteristics, one interesting organizational intervention may be to identify women for future leadership positions based on attitude. Which brings me to the next part about the discussion was, it started to bring in not only physical aspects of women, but also how their attitude and the way they view the military, as well as the way they view their fellow men and women in the military, should play a factor and a role in whether or not women should be allowed to be leaders in our military officers, essentially. Also, the article states that any discussion about identifying women for leadership positions must not ask only how to get women promoted, but also whether they stay once promoted. Since women do not have the same opportunity as men to serve in the U.S. Sea duty, for example, they may not possess the human capital necessary for promotion to commander and captain, and may simply recognize this limitation by quitting. So this sort of states that can a woman handle being promoted physically, emotionally, because women's emotions are very different than men's. And so the article kind of discusses just every general aspect of how women should be viewed in the eyes of the military, as well as the leadership military aspects. Finally, the conclusion, this was titled Seeking the Best Leaders. The article stated, for example, by virtue of their successes in coping, example, not standing out as a target, the women with the most potential for leadership may also be the most difficult to spot because they have learned to be carefully monitor their displays of masculine or leader-like behavior in order to succeed. So in other words, women are more afraid than men to stand out above the crowd, because they may be afraid that they're going to outshine a male who they shouldn't be messing with, who may be a higher rank than them and doesn't want to be shown up by a woman. So they've learned to hide in the crowd, which is, the article concludes that this is where our best leadership lies, is hidden in the crowd as it comes to with women. And consequently, when decisions about selection into leadership training programs are being made, we believe that more attention should be given to personalities and attitudes congruent with leadership. So the basic conclusion that I got from the article is that it's more than just one aspect. It's physical, it's emotional, it's attitude, it's characteristics. That's how we should perceive women as leaders in our military. And if they can prove themselves as being just as good as the males, then we should not look down upon them, that they should be just as recognizable as our male population in the military.